So I'm going to talk about CQRS. And if you think a talk like this would take longer than 50 minutes, then you're the intended audience. So I don't think it means what you think it means. The reason why I said this is because most of the time when I'm at conferences, which clearly haven't happened in like a year or whatever, most of the time when I'm talking about related subjects and CQRS comes up, most of the people I'm talking to have a wildly different view or definition of what CQRS actually is. So I think the reason, like many things in our industry, unfortunately, they start off with a very simple definition. And then that definition gets butchered basically over time. That it's kind of like the telephone game where one person kind of has one interpretation, then they kind of give out that interpretation, which gets to the next person. And over time, we end up with just not really what it was originally. I think there's a lot of different reasons why this is the case and why people have different kind of interpretations. But this is kind of just our industry in general. If I were to say, hey, everybody, what's the definition of a service? Good luck getting anywhere near consensus. Or my example I always use is when you talk about REST, most people are talking about an HTTP API or just HTTP in general and not really talking about REST per se. So the thing with CQRS is that it's really not that complicated, but if you are brand new to it and you want to kind of see what it's all about, and you do a Google search, like this was me being incognito mode, doing a search for CQRS, and I would say most of the articles are fairly decent. There's some really atrocious ones in this list, but they all kind of start talking about different things a little bit. So especially if you start looking at some of these images, they are the epitome of why I think people generally think CQRS is complicated and why they do not need to even think about it for their project. That's the comment I hear the most is, my project is super simple. CQRS is way too complicated. It would overcomplicate my project. So if you read most of these blog posts or you do the Google image search on this stuff, you're going to find a diagram like this most of the time, or there's going to be bits and pieces of this. So there are, yes, this is applying CQRS, but it's also doing a bunch of other stuff. And unfortunately, that bunch of other stuff is what gets conflated with CQRS that makes it seem complicated. The problem therein lies is that most people don't acknowledge that there's other stuff going on. It starts off as, hey, this is the intro to CQRS, and all this other stuff comes into play, and it's kind of hard to distinguish what those other things are. So that's what I'm going to do, is kind of more so describe what the other things are that are not have anything to do with it. So hopefully it gives a little clarity. The other big problem with, I guess, definition is that Greg Young, who coined the term, used to blog on codebetter.com. He used to also blog on his own site called goodenoughsoftware.net. And unfortunately, neither of those sites exist anymore. So if you want to go to the person that coined the term to see what he had to say about it way back when, you either have to jump back to the Wayback Machine on archive.org, which I have here just to give a little screenshot, because this is kind of the blog post that he wrote. So yeah, this is back in 2010. And this is the kind of the quote that I use every time. So it's really the second paragraph, which is, to me, the total definition. So it's simply the creation of two objects where there were previously only one. The separation occurs based on whether the methods are commands or a query. This is the same definition used by Bertrand Meyer in command query separation. A command is any method that mutates state, and a query is any method that returns a value. So that is, to me, the definition. It's really not that exciting. It doesn't seem all that complicated just by that. And it's really kind of boring. Really, when you want to talk about CQRS, it's really not all that exciting. It's really just the separation of reads and writes. So in this blog post, I kind of formatted it a little bit better here so you can see it. So in this post, this is pretty much the example Greg uses. is he has a customer service and then a bunch of different methods that do various things. So we have a make customer preferred, the get customers with name, get customer or preferred customers, change the customer's locale, create a customer, and edit the customer's details. So if we have this service that does both methods that return state and methods that return a value, it's really just taking this and splitting it up. That's really the end of it. So you now have a kind of a write command service. So command being changing state. So all the methods that are changing state are kind of grouped together, and one basically another object for returning state. So basically it's the exact same set of methods. They've just been separated into a write service and a read service. So that is CQRS entirely. You now understand what CQRS is. That's it. It's not complicated. It's just about separating reads and writes. Where I think the complication comes in is that I always call CQRS like it's kind of like a gateway. It opens up a lot of possibilities just by simply separating reads and writes. I'll have a link at the end to a PDF that's still available from Greg that kind of goes into the details of some of these things. But if I jump back to this diagram is what lets you do all, like CQRS is the kind of this top piece, just separating this out from this out. But all this other stuff has nothing to do with CQRS, but it allows you to do it. So the first misconception, easily by far the biggest misconception I always hear, is that you need multiple databases because you're separating reads and writes. A lot of the lingo is often termed as you have multiple models, but that doesn't mean physical data models. That doesn't mean different physical schemas. It has nothing to do with different actual physical storage of whatever you're storing, persisting in your database. So you do not need multiple databases. It's not like you need a separate database that you're going to write to, that you're then going to transform in some ways, doing some ETL stuff to have into a different database. None of that. So it's simple as you have some client that's making some request, some command, however that is, to some write side. And that could be interacting with the exact same database that your read side is. Another way that I often like to frame this is, because you'll often hear about separate databases and you want to kind of optimize the read side, especially if a system that's read heavy, is that you may not want to be, if you're using a relational database, you may not want to have kind of a third normal form or something really normalized. You may want something really denormalized. I got news that a projection is really, you could think of it as a view, as a relational database view. It's the exact same thing. So there's really nothing stopping you from using the exact same database and creating views to kind of create that composition of what the data is that you really want, how you really want to see it. That might be easier for queries to use. But even if you didn't do that and you're using the exact same table schema, database schema, you're still doing CQRS as long as you're separating reads and writes, basically. The second biggest myth is that event sourcing and CQRS are kind of the same thing, which they're not. I think this stems from Greg himself, who started the database called Event Store. And he's been a big proponent of event sourcing. And because he coined the term, and most of the examples that you'll see are applying CQRS with event sourcing, I think that's why this gets lumped in, as well as a lot of people that are doing CQRS are also doing event sourcing. So most of the time when people frame it, they will say CQRS/ES to stand for event sourcing, like the two combined. So they often get lumped together, but that's not to say that you have to be doing event sourcing when you're if you're doing CQRS. You don't. So you do not need an event store. You don't need to be doing anything with events or storing events. And just to kind of clarify what event sourcing is instead of thinking about storing current state in a database, you would be storing essentially a stream of events that represent all the different state changes that get you to that get you to current state, or really at any point in time. So you're recording it's kind of like a book of record of everything that has occurred to get you to where you are. So instead of thinking of, if you were thinking of a relational database or even a document database, instead of having a table or a document that represented a shopping cart with all the items in it that you may be purchasing, rather you're storing the events, the things that have happened in the past, that have concrete happened, that the user has done, that you can represent, and you can basically project that in many different ways. So at any point in time, you could replay these events and look at, okay, this is what at this particular point in time, what that user shopping basket actually looked like. This is event sourcing. This has nothing to do with CQRS, although generally when you see articles, most people that are talking about event sourcing also imply CQRS. So the last one is that fits into the idea, if you're using event sourcing, is that you're doing things with a message broker, or you're using some type of messaging, that you're doing async messaging, meaning that the user is going to do something. It's going to hit some message broker, some command bus. You're going to have some command handlers that goes into some domain model in the kind of domain-driven design aggregate sense. And that's going to emit some event, and that's going to be sent to an event bus. And that asynchronously then is going to update some other database, which we already talked about, and that there's this big loop. And that you're going to have eventual consistency. Has nothing to do with async messaging, has nothing to do with eventual consistency. Everything that you're doing when you're doing commands and queries can all be in process, can all be synchronous. There's nothing asynchronous about it. So the last kind of screenshot I'll give you is, this is from, again, on the Wayback Machine on archive.org, from Greg's blog. I think he probably felt the same way at some point, which is in 2012, so 8 years ago, about all the things that people are thinking it is, that it's not a silver bullet. It's not a top level architecture. It's not new. It's not shiny. And my favorite, it will not make you have a better jump shot. It's not intrinsically linked to DDD. I think people kind of link it to DDD in some way, probably because that's where the cycle of people, including myself, kind of latched onto it. But it has nothing to do with domain-driven design at all. As I said, it's not event sourcing. It does not require a message bus. It's not a guiding principle, and he says that CQS is. So again, CQRS is just an extension, if you will, of CQS. So CQS is just saying at a method level, something either returns state or mutate state. And again, CQRS is just taking that a level further from the object point of view. It's not a good wife, and it is learnable in 5 minutes. I think I did it in about 13 minutes. I think probably could have got the gist in the first 5. But the tactical pattern of just separating these things into two kind of streams, or two different paths within your app, allow you to do a lot of things. That's why I said it can open many doors, because it allows you to scale differently, different sides of reads and writes, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to do any of that stuff. So with that, I will shoot this somewhere, probably in a Slack, some of these links, because if you get on archive.org, you can find a lot of the old posts. And then this PDF is available still, which is really useful. It's I wouldn't say it's too long, but it gives you a better gist of what the reasoning was. I think how Greg came up with it, a little bit more of the backstory of what software looked like. So it might give you, if you really want to get into it and kind of the doors that it does open, I recommend that PDF. And with that, that is it. Oops. Thank you.